My husband Jerry bet his best friend Byron I'd collapse in tears when they served me divorce papers at Christmas dinner. Emma's always been weak. He laughed over his whiskey. I signed those papers with a steady hand, then slid a crimson gift box across the table. When they opened it, Jerry went white as snow. But let me take you back to that moment, because what happened in my dining room that Christmas evening wasn't just revenge, it was the culmination of 18 months of careful planning, silent preparation, and a discovery so devastating it changed everything I thought I knew about the man I'd married. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The dining room glowed with warm amber light from the crystal chandelier Jerry's mother had insisted we buy for our 5th anniversary. Candles flickered along the mahogany table, casting dancing shadows across the faces of our dinner guests, my sister Henrietta and her husband Ryan Roberts, Jerry's parents, and of course Byron Jacobs, Jerry's college roommate and business partner who'd been whispering in his ear all evening. I remember the weight of the moment pressing down on my shoulders as I moved around the table, refilling wine glasses with practiced grace. My emerald dress, the one Jerry had once said made my eyes sparkle, felt like armor that night. Every step was calculated, every smile measured. I'd been rehearsing this evening in my mind for weeks. Jerry stood at the head of the table, carving the honey-glazed ham with theatrical precision. He wore his navy suit, the expensive one he saved for client meetings and special occasions. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his confident smile radiating the kind of charm that had first attracted me 15 years ago at a law conference in Chicago. "To family," he announced, raising his crystal tumbler of bourbon. The table responded with a chorus of agreement, glasses clinking in the warm light. I lifted my own glass, sparkling cider though everyone assumed it was champagne, and watched Jerry's eyes as they met mine across the table. There was something different in his gaze that night, a coldness I'd been seeing more frequently over the past year, mixed with an anticipation that made my stomach tighten. Byron caught my attention from the corner of my eye, his fingers drumming against his wine glass in a nervous rhythm that seemed almost excited. "Emma's outdone herself again," Jerry continued, gesturing toward the elaborate spread I'd spent 2 days preparing. Prime rib, roasted vegetables, that famous apple stuffing recipe from her grandmother. She really knows how to play the perfect hostess. The way he said play sent a chill down my spine. Not because I was afraid, I'd moved past fear months ago, but because it confirmed what I'd suspected. Tonight wasn't just Christmas dinner. Tonight was his stage, his moment to execute whatever plan he and Byron had been crafting during their weekly golf games and late-night phone calls. Henrietta squeezed my hand gently as I passed behind her chair. My sister had always been my anchor, the one person who saw through Jerry's polished exterior to the calculating man beneath. She'd been asking pointed questions for months, noticing things others missed, how Jerry never complimented me anymore without adding a subtle dig, how he'd started excluding me from social events with his colleagues, how he'd grown increasingly controlling about our finances while becoming mysteriously secretive about his own spending. "The ham is incredible, Emma," Ryan offered, always the diplomat. As a financial advisor, he understood the importance of maintaining harmony, even when tensions simmered beneath the surface. "That glaze recipe, is it the one from your mother's cookbook?" "It is," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "She always said the secret was in the timing. You can't rush perfection." Jerry's laugh had an edge to it. "Emma's always been one for timing," he said, exchanging a meaningful glance with Byron. "Speaking of which, I have a little surprise for my beautiful wife." My heart rate increased, but not from panic. After months of preparation, the moment I'd been anticipating was finally here. I'd rehearsed my reaction countless times, practiced the exact expression of calm surprise I'd need to pull off what came next. Byron leaned back in his chair, his corporate lawyer instincts clearly enjoying the drama about to unfold. He'd always underestimated me, viewing me as nothing more than Jerry's pretty wife who organized charity galas and made small talk at dinner parties. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I'd been 3 years ahead of him at Harvard Law before I chose to focus on family. My legal mind had never stopped working, I'd simply channeled it in directions they never bothered to notice. Jerry reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a manila envelope, placing it on the table with the ceremonial weight of a judge delivering a verdict. The conversation around the table gradually died as everyone noticed the formal document. "Merry Christmas, darling," Jerry said, his voice dripping with false affection. "I thought it was time we made some adjustments to our arrangement." I looked at the envelope, then back at Jerry's face. His expression was a masterpiece of controlled smugness, the look of a man who believed he held all the cards. Byron was practically vibrating with anticipation, his earlier nervous energy transformed into barely contained excitement. Henrietta's face had gone pale, her instincts immediately sensing danger. Jerry's parents looked confused, his mother clutching her pearls with the unconscious gesture of a woman who'd spent decades perfecting the art of willful ignorance. I picked up the envelope with steady fingers, noting how Jerry's smile widened. This was his moment of triumph, the culmination of whatever scheme he'd been plotting. He expected tears, begging, perhaps even hysteria. He'd structured this entire evening around his anticipation of my breakdown. Instead, I opened the envelope with the calm precision of someone reviewing a grocery list. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." The words were stark against the white paper, accompanied by Jerry's already notarized signature and a filing date of December 23rd, tomorrow. "Divorce papers," I said simply, my voice carrying no more emotion than if I'd announced the weather. "Filed and ready to submit." Jerry's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the reaction he'd choreographed. Around the table, the silence grew thick and uncomfortable. I set the papers down gently, then reached beneath my chair where I'd placed a beautifully wrapped gift box earlier that evening. Crimson paper with gold ribbon, elegant and festive, the kind of presentation that took time and thought to create. "What perfect timing," I said, sliding the box across the polished table toward Jerry. "Because I have something for you too." The confidence in Jerry's eyes wavered as he looked at the gift, then, at my serene expression. Byron leaned forward, his lawyer's curiosity clearly piqued. "Open it," I said softly. "I think you'll find it illuminating." And that's when Jerry Jacobs discovered that betting against Emma Roberts had been the biggest mistake of his life. But this story didn't begin at that Christmas table with Jerry's smug confidence and my crimson gift box. It started 3 years earlier, in what I believed was the golden period of our marriage, those blissful months when Jerry had just been promoted to senior partner at Jacobs, Morrison and Associates, and our future seemed to stretch ahead like a perfectly planned garden party. We were living in the Riverside Heights neighborhood then, in a colonial revival house with white shutters and a wraparound porch that Jerry loved to showcase during the firm's annual summer barbecues. I remember standing in our kitchen that September morning, sunlight streaming through the bay windows, as I packed Jerry's lunch in the leather briefcase his father had given him when he passed the bar exam. "You don't need to do that anymore," Jerry had said, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. "Nancy can handle lunch orders for all the partners now." But I enjoyed those small rituals, the way I'd slip handwritten notes between his legal briefs, how I'd pack his favorite turkey sandwich with that imported mustard from the German deli downtown. It felt like partnership, like we were building something together even when we spent our days in different worlds. Jerry's promotion had come with a corner office on the 18th floor, a substantial salary increase, and what he described as serious responsibility. He was handling the firm's highest-profile corporate clients now, working on mergers and acquisitions that often made the financial pages of the Herald Tribune. The stress was significant, but Jerry thrived under pressure, always had even back in law school when he'd somehow managed to ace his finals while planning elaborate study group dinners. Those early months of his partnership were intoxicating for both of us. Jerry would come home energized, full of stories about boardroom negotiations and million-dollar deals. We'd open a bottle of wine on the back patio, and he'd walk me through his day, asking my opinion on strategy, bouncing ideas off my legal background, even though I'd been out of practice since we'd started trying for children. "You should come back to law," he'd say during those wine-soaked evenings, his hand finding mine across the wrought iron table. "Morrison's looking for someone to head up their new family law division. You'd be perfect, Harvard credentials, natural instincts, and you already know the firm culture." I'd been tempted, the intellectual challenge called to me, especially during the long days when Jerry was at the office and our house felt too quiet, too empty. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But we'd been trying to start a family for 2 years by then, and every month that passed without a positive pregnancy test felt like a small failure I needed to process privately. Maybe next year, I'd always say, and Jerry would nod, understanding without needing explanation. That was one of the things I'd loved most about our early marriage, how he could read my moods, how he seemed to genuinely want my happiness even when it meant postponing his own plans. The firm's Christmas party that year was held at the Riverside Country Club, in the grand ballroom with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the golf course. I wore a midnight blue cocktail dress that Jerry had helped me pick out, and I remember feeling proud walking into that room on his arm, watching how the other partners' wives smiled with genuine warmth when they saw us. Byron Jacobs was there. Of course, he'd been Jerry's closest friend since their first year at Northwestern Law, and now as the firm's managing partner, he was essentially Jerry's boss. Byron had always been charming in a calculated way, the kind of man who remembered everyone's children's names and never forgot to ask about aging parents. His wife Judy was sweet but timid, often seeming overwhelmed by the social demands of being married to someone so prominent in the local legal community. That night, Byron raised a toast specifically to Jerry, praising his natural leadership and exceptional client management skills. The room applauded, and I felt a surge of pride watching my husband accept recognition for work I knew he genuinely loved. "Emma, you must be so proud," Judy had whispered to me during the cocktail hour, her voice carrying that slightly envious tone I'd learned to recognize from other wives. Jerry's meteoric rise, it's like something out of a movie. I was proud. Jerry had worked 16-hour days for months, had studied every case file with obsessive attention to detail, had impressed clients who'd initially seemed skeptical of the firm's young hotshot. His success felt earned, deserved. What I didn't realize that night, couldn't have imagined as I watched Jerry work the room with natural confidence, was that his promotion had changed something fundamental in how he saw our relationship. The man who'd once valued my legal opinion was slowly beginning to view my intellectual contributions as unnecessary. The husband who'd encouraged my career ambitions was starting to see my domestic focus as confirmation that I was happiest in a supporting role. The shift was so gradual, I almost missed it entirely. It started with small things, how Jerry stopped asking for my input on his cases, how he began making social commitments without consulting me first, how he'd started referring to my house and my car rather than ours when talking to colleagues. But that Christmas party, standing in the country club ballroom with champagne bubbles tickling my nose and Jerry's arm around my waist, I believed we were entering the strongest chapter of our marriage. I thought his success would give us the foundation to build the family we'd been dreaming about. I thought the man who whispered "I love you" against my ear, as Byron finished his toast, was the same man who'd promised to be my partner in everything forever. I thought a lot of things that turned out to be beautifully, devastatingly wrong. The real Jerry Jacobs was just beginning to emerge, and I was about to learn that success doesn't reveal character. It simply gives character the confidence to show its true face. The first crack in my perfect marriage appeared on a Tuesday morning in March, disguised as a compliment that left me feeling hollow for reasons I couldn't immediately understand. I was making breakfast, steel-cut oats with fresh blueberries and a drizzle of local honey, the kind of nutritious meal Jerry claimed gave him energy for his demanding court schedule. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and coffee, morning sunlight casting geometric patterns across our granite countertops through the plantation shutters. Jerry stood at the island, scrolling through emails on his phone while sipping his espresso. He was dressed in his charcoal Tom Ford suit, the one that cost more than some people's monthly rent, but made him look like he belonged in the pages of a legal magazine. "Emma, darling," he said without looking up from his screen, "you really should consider getting a hobby." I paused, wooden spoon halfway to my mouth for a taste test. A hobby, something to keep you busy during the day. Maybe photography, or pottery. He finally glanced up, offering me that practiced smile I was beginning to recognize from his client meetings. "It's just that you seem so content with domestic things." I worry you're not challenging yourself intellectually. The words stung in a way I couldn't articulate. Here was my husband, supposedly concerned about my intellectual stimulation, speaking to me like I was a child who needed guidance rather than a Harvard Law graduate who'd chosen to focus on our home and future family. I'm reading the Morrison case files you brought home, I said carefully. The Sullivan merger has some fascinating jurisdictional complications. Jerry's laugh was light, dismissive. That's sweet, but those are confidential documents, client privilege and all that. I probably shouldn't have left them where you could see them. Sweet. He'd called my legal analysis sweet, the same way someone might praise a child's finger painting. I set down my spoon and really looked at my husband, at the way he was already moving toward the door, briefcase in hand, conversation clearly over in his mind. Jerry, I was thinking maybe I should call Morrison about that family law position. The one you mentioned. He stopped, turned back with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, but something colder, more calculating. Oh, Emma, I should have mentioned, they filled that position last month. Internal hire. But honestly, he stepped closer, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I was beginning to dread. You've been out of practice for so long. It might be better to start smaller, maybe volunteer work? The hospital auxiliary is always looking for help with their fundraising galas. I stood there, still holding that wooden spoon, watching my husband reduce 15 years of education and career ambition to event planning. The worst part wasn't his dismissal, it was how reasonable he made it sound, how he packaged condescension as concern. That evening, Jerry came home 2 hours later than usual, claiming he'd been in back-to-back client meetings. I'd kept dinner warm, his favorite salmon with herb butter, but when I mentioned my day spent researching family law developments, hoping to show him my continued professional interest, he barely looked up from his phone. He murmured, thumbs flying across his screen. That's nice, honey. I might as well have been telling him about the weather. The pattern established itself over the following weeks. Jerry would make casual comments about my simple routine, would interrupt my sentences at dinner parties to clarify points I'd made perfectly well myself, would speak for me when neighbors asked about my plans as if I were incapable of forming my own responses. At a barbecue hosted by Ryan and Henrietta in April, I was discussing the local school board elections with several other women when Jerry appeared at my elbow. Emma's very passionate about education, he announced to the group, his hand landing possessively on my lower back. But she sometimes gets a bit carried away with the political aspects. It's adorable, really. Adorable, like I was a pet with amusing tricks. Henrietta caught my eye across the patio later that evening, her expression troubled. Everything okay with you and Jerry? She asked when we were alone in her kitchen, helping clear dessert plates. Of course, I replied automatically. Why would you ask? He's just different lately, more controlling. The way he speaks for you, it's like he doesn't trust you to have your own opinions. I wanted to defend my husband, to explain that he was just protective, that the stress of his new position was making him more assertive. But the words felt hollow even as I formed them. He's been working incredibly hard, I said instead. The partnership comes with a lot of pressure. Henrietta nodded, but her eyes remained skeptical. My sister had always been able to read people with unsettling accuracy. It's what made her such a successful investigative journalist. If she was picking up on something concerning about Jerry's behavior, maybe it wasn't just my imagination. That night, as Jerry scrolled through his tablet in bed, I tried to bring up my conversation with Henrietta. She thinks you've been a bit protective lately. Jerry didn't look up from his screen. Henrietta's always been jealous of what we have. Single women often are. He glanced at me briefly. You shouldn't let her plant ideas in your head, Emma. She doesn't understand the dynamics of a successful marriage. The casual dismissal of my sister's concerns, the implication that I was too naive to recognize manipulation, it all felt like tiny paper cuts accumulating into something more painful. But I convinced myself, these were growing pains, adjustments to Jerry's increased status and responsibility. Successful men often became more decisive, more assertive. This was probably normal. I had no idea that normal was exactly what Jerry was counting on me to believe. By summer, Jerry's subtle corrections had evolved into a systematic pattern of undermining that I could no longer dismiss as stress or coincidence. It started with the guest list for our annual 4th of July party, a tradition we'd maintained for 7 years, always held in our backyard, with red, white, and blue bunting strung between the oak trees and my grandmother's famous potato salad recipe. I'd spent weeks planning the menu, coordinating with our usual group of friends, ensuring we had enough seating for everyone. "I've invited the Morrison partners and their wives," Jerry announced casually over breakfast, 2 days before the party. "Byron thinks it would be good for firm relations." I looked up from my coffee, confused. "That's 15 additional people, Jerry. I've already bought food for 30. "Well, you'll need to adjust." His tone was matter of fact, as if I'd suggested something unreasonable. "These are important clients and colleagues. Surely you can figure out the catering." With 2 days' notice, Jerry's expression shifted to that patient look I was learning to hate, the one that suggested I was being dramatic about something simple. "Emma, this is what partners' wives do. They adapt, they support their husbands' careers gracefully." The word gracefully hit like a slap, as if my concern about hosting nearly twice the expected number of guests was somehow ungraceful, unreasonable. I spent those 2 days scrambling, calling caterers who were already booked, driving to 3 different grocery stores to find enough supplies, rearranging our entire backyard setup. When Jerry came home that Friday evening to find me exhausted and stressed, he seemed genuinely surprised. "You look tired, sweetheart. Maybe you should have asked for help instead of trying to handle everything yourself." Asked for help. As if the additional guests had been my idea, the party itself became a case study in how Jerry had begun to view our relationship. While I rushed between the kitchen and patio, ensuring everyone had drinks and food, Jerry held court near the pool, regaling the Morrison partners with stories about his recent courtroom victories. When Mrs. Morrison complimented the decorations, Jerry waved dismissively. "Emma goes a bit overboard with these things. I keep telling her simple is better, but you know how women get about entertaining. You know how women get." Like I was a stereotype rather than his wife, like my efforts were cute but excessive rather than thoughtful and skilled. Byron Jacobs cornered me later that evening while I was refilling the ice bucket. "Jerry's lucky to have such a dedicated wife," he said, but something in his tone felt off. Not every woman would be so accommodating. Accommodating. Another word that made my skin crawl. "It's what partners do," I replied, echoing Jerry's earlier phrase. "We support each other." Byron's smile was razor thin. "Of course, though I do hope Jerry appreciates how much you adjust for his career needs." That conversation haunted me for days. Byron's emphasis on adjust and accommodating suggested he'd noticed something I was only beginning to acknowledge, that my role in the marriage had shifted from equal partner to supporting player, and that Jerry had been discussing this dynamic with his colleagues. The confirmation came during a dinner party at the Riverside Country Club in August. Jerry had been invited to speak at a legal symposium in Denver, and as he described the honor to our table mates, I mentioned how excited I was to see Colorado for the first time. "Oh, Emma won't be coming," Jerry said smoothly, cutting his steak without looking at me. "It's a working trip, very intensive schedule. She'd just be sitting alone in hotel rooms." This was news to me. We'd discussed the trip several times, and Jerry had never suggested I shouldn't accompany him. In fact, I'd already researched museums and restaurants we might visit together during his free time. "But Jerry," I thought, "Emma sometimes gets confused about business versus pleasure trips," Jerry interrupted, that patient smile firmly in place. "She's not used to the demands of partner-level travel." The humiliation was swift and complete. Around the table, I watched our friends' expressions shift from surprise to uncomfortable recognition. Jerry had just publicly dismissed my intelligence, my understanding of his career, and my right to participate in major decisions. Henrietta reached for my hand under the table, her grip tight with shared anger. But I couldn't respond, couldn't defend myself without creating a scene that would only reinforce Jerry's narrative about my inability to handle professional situations gracefully. That night, lying in bed next to my husband as he scrolled through his phone with casual indifference, I finally admitted what I'd been avoiding for months. This wasn't stress, it wasn't adjustment to his new position, and it certainly wasn't normal marriage dynamics. Jerry Jacobs was systematically erasing my voice, my opinions, and my autonomy. and he was doing it so skillfully that even I had been questioning whether my concerns were valid. But patterns, once recognized, become impossible to ignore, and I was very good at recognizing patterns. The moment everything changed happened on a rain-soaked Thursday evening in October, at Morrison's annual Client Appreciation Gala, the kind of black-tie affair where legal careers were made or broken over champagne and carefully orchestrated conversations. I'd spent weeks preparing for the event. My dress was a deep forest green silk that Jerry had approved after rejecting 3 other options as too attention-seeking or not quite right for firm functions. I'd researched every major client attending, memorized their business backgrounds and recent legal challenges, prepared thoughtful conversation starters that would reflect well on Jerry's partnership. The Riverside Grand Ballroom glittered with crystal and candlelight, filled with the city's most influential attorneys, judges, and corporate executives. Jerry looked magnificent in his tailored tuxedo, moving through the crowd with the confidence of someone who belonged among this elite circle. For the first hour, everything proceeded smoothly. I made conversation with clients' wives, remembered to ask Judge Patterson about his recent sailing trip, complimented Mrs. Henderson on her stunning diamond necklace. Jerry seemed pleased with my performance, even introducing me to several new clients with something approaching pride. Then I met Marcus Rodriguez, CEO of Rodriguez Holdings, one of Morrison's most lucrative accounts. He was discussing the complex environmental regulations affecting his manufacturing plants when I mentioned my familiarity with the recent EPA ruling changes, information I'd absorbed during my months of reading Jerry's case files. "You're absolutely right about the compliance timeline," Rodriguez said, his face lighting up with genuine interest. "Most attorneys don't catch that nuance. What's your background in environmental law?" "I graduated from Harvard Law," I began, "and I've been following the regulatory developments closely. Emma has a lot of time to read these days." Jerry's voice cut through our conversation like a blade. He appeared at my elbow with 2 fresh champagne flutes, his smile bright and dangerous. "She's developed quite the hobby of playing armchair lawyer." The word hobby landed like a physical blow. Rodriguez's expression shifted from professional interest to polite confusion, clearly uncertain how to respond to Jerry's dismissal of what had been a knowledgeable legal discussion. "Actually," I said, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest, "I was explaining the implementation timeline for the new water treatment standards." "Emma, darling," Jerry interrupted again, his hand finding my lower back with just enough pressure to signal control. "Mr. Rodriguez doesn't need a lecture on regulatory law. I'm sure he has actual attorneys for that." The silence that followed was excruciating. Rodriguez mumbled something about needing to find his wife and escaped as quickly as politeness allowed. Jerry's hand remained on my back, his grip tightening slightly as he steered me away from the retreating CEO. "What the hell was that?" I whispered when we were relatively alone near the bar. Jerry's facade never slipped. "That was you embarrassing yourself and by extension me. Rodriguez is our client Emma, not your law school study partner. He doesn't want to hear amateur legal analysis from someone who's never practiced environmental law." "Amateur?" The word escaped before I could stop it, loud enough that several nearby guests glanced in our direction. "Lower your voice," Jerry hissed, his smile remaining perfectly in place for the benefit of any observers. "You're making a scene." But I couldn't lower my voice, couldn't swallow this particular humiliation. I was having an intelligent conversation about a subject I understand. Rodriguez was engaged, interested. Rodriguez was being polite to the partner's wife. Jerry's voice was quietly venomous. "Do you think he actually values your opinion on environmental law? You're not an attorney anymore, Emma. You're my wife. There's a difference." The words hit like a physical assault. Around us, the gala continued, laughter, clinking glasses, the gentle hum of networking and deal-making. But in our small bubble of space, everything had gone silent except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. "I am an attorney," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Jerry's laugh was soft, cruel. "You were an attorney, now you're a woman who reads legal briefs as a hobby and thinks that qualifies her to advise Fortune 500 CEOs. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to ensure only I could hear. "Do you understand how pathetic that makes you look? How pathetic it makes me look, having a wife who can't recognize her own limitations?" I stared at my husband, this man I'd loved for 15 years, who'd once valued my intellect and ambition, and saw a stranger, someone who derived satisfaction from diminishing me, who felt threatened by my knowledge rather than proud of it. "I'm going to the restroom," I managed to say. "Good idea," Jerry replied smoothly. "Take a moment to compose yourself." "And Emma?" His smile was brilliant, perfect for anyone watching. "Remember where you are, remember who you're representing." I walked to the ladies' room on unsteady legs, my reflection in the gilt-framed mirror showing a woman I barely recognized, elegant dress, perfect makeup, and eyes that looked utterly defeated. That was the moment I stopped making excuses for Jerry Jacobs. That was the moment I realized I was married to my enemy. 3 weeks after the gala humiliation, Jerry handed me the weapon that would eventually destroy him. He did it carelessly, drunkenly, and with the kind of arrogant confidence that comes from believing your opponent has already surrendered. It was a Friday night in November, the kind of gray, bone-chilling evening that made our house feel like a fortress against the approaching winter. Jerry had come home from another client dinner that I suspected had involved more bourbon than business, his tie loosened and his usually precise hair slightly disheveled. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after the dinner I'd eaten alone, again when he wandered in, a tumbler of Macallan 18 in his hand, and that loose, dangerous smile that alcohol brought out in him. "Emma, my devoted wife," he said, the words slurring slightly at the edges. "Always in the kitchen, always cleaning. So domestic, so predictable." I didn't respond, just continued loading plates into the dishwasher with careful precision. Jerry in this mood was like handling explosives, any sudden movement might trigger something ugly. "You know what Byron said tonight?" Jerry leaned against the marble island, watching me with the focused intensity of someone trying to appear more sober than they were. "He said I should get a prenup." "Retroactive prenup, is that even a thing?" I paused, a wine glass halfway to the top rack. "Jerry, we've been married for 12 years. Prenups happen before marriage. But postnups exist, right? Post-marital agreements." He was warming to the topic now, his lawyer brain engaging despite the alcohol. "Byron thinks I should protect my assets. My partnership share, the house, my future earnings." "Smart man, Byron. Why would you need to protect assets from your wife?" I asked carefully, my voice neutral despite the ice forming in my stomach. Jerry's laugh was harsh, unforgiving. "Because wives leave, Emma. They take half of everything a man has worked for, then act like they earned it. Look at Peterson from Morrison. His ex-wife got the house, the cars, alimony for life. All because she happened to be married to him when he made senior partner." I set down the glass with deliberate care. "Is that what you think I'd do?" "Think," Jerry said, moving closer with the predatory grace of someone who smelled weakness, "that women are unpredictable. One day they're loving wives, the next day they're hiring divorce attorneys and claiming emotional abuse." He air-quoted the last two words with drunken sarcasm. "Better to be prepared." My hands were trembling now, but I kept my voice steady. "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we make this official, put it in writing. You get a fair settlement if things don't work out. Say, the guest house, and maybe 50,000, and I keep everything I've actually earned. The partnership, the investments, the real property." Jerry pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts with the focused determination of the intoxicated. "I could call Morrison's contract guy right now. Draw something up. It's 11 o'clock at night, Jerry." "Fine. Tomorrow then, or..." He stopped, struck by what he clearly thought was inspiration. "You know what? Let's do this the old-fashioned way. Handwritten agreement. More romantic." Jerry lurched toward the kitchen drawer, where we kept pens and paper, returning with a yellow legal pad and a black Mont Blanc pen, the one I'd given him for his first partnership anniversary. "Okay," he muttered, tongue poking between his lips in concentration as he began to write. "Post-marital asset protection agreement between Jerry Jacobs and Emma Roberts Jacobs." I watched, fascinated despite myself, as my husband drunkenly drafted what he believed would be his insurance policy against my imagined gold-digging tendencies. His handwriting was messier than usual but still legible, his legal training evident even through the bourbon haze. In the event of marital dissolution, he read aloud as he wrote, Emma Roberts Jacobs waives claim to partnership assets, primary residence, investment accounts, and future earnings of Jerry Jacobs. He looked up, pleased with himself. What else should I add? Maybe something about debt responsibility, I suggested, my voice carefully neutral. Good thinking. Both parties remain responsible for debts incurred during marriage. He scribbled frantically, clearly enjoying this exercise in protecting himself from his theoretical grasping wife. When he finished, Jerry dated the document and signed it with a flourish, then slid it across the granite countertop toward me. There, sign that and we're both protected. No messy divorce proceedings, no fighting over who gets what. Clean and simple. I picked up the pen, aware that this moment would define everything that came after. Jerry watched with satisfaction as I signed my name beneath his, never questioning why I'd agreed so readily to what appeared to be a spectacularly one-sided agreement. Smart woman, he said, folding the paper carelessly and shoving it into his jacket pocket. Byron will be impressed. Most wives would have thrown a fit. What Jerry didn't realize, what his alcohol-clouded judgment had prevented him from seeing, was that he'd just written and signed a document that would, when properly interpreted by someone with actual legal expertise, prove to be the most expensive piece of paper he'd ever put his name on. Sometimes the best weapons are the ones your enemy forges for you. The morning after Jerry's drunken contract drafting, I woke before dawn with a clarity that felt like emerging from underwater. While my husband slept off his bourbon-induced confidence in the bedroom next to me, I lay perfectly still and felt something fundamental shift in my chest, not breaking, but hardening into something unbreakable. I waited until Jerry left for his Saturday golf game with Byron, before retrieving the crumpled yellow paper from his jacket pocket. In the bright morning light, reading his handwritten terms with a clear head, I realized my husband had made a mistake that would have gotten him laughed out of his first-year contracts course. The language was sloppy, ambiguous in exactly the ways that favor the party who didn't draft it. Jerry had been so focused on protecting his partnership assets that he'd failed to define key terms, created loopholes large enough to drive a truck through, and most critically included a clause about debt responsibility that could be interpreted in ways that would terrify him if he'd been sober enough to think it through. I photographed every page with my phone, uploaded the images to a secure cloud storage account I created that morning, and tucked the original back into Jerry's jacket exactly where I'd found it. Then I drove to the downtown library and spent 3 hours researching post-marital agreements, asset protection law, and the specific statutes governing marital property in our state. By the time Jerry returned home, sun-flushed and cheerful from 18 holes and several beers, I had transformed from his compliant wife into something far more dangerous, a woman with a plan. Good game, I asked, greeting him at the door with the same warm smile I'd perfected over 12 years of marriage. Fantastic. Byron shot an 89, worst round he's had all year. Jerry kissed my cheek, smelling like grass and expensive sunscreen. What did you do with your day? Oh, just some errands. Grocery shopping, library. The truth, just not the complete truth. I started reading that new biography of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Jerry's expression flickered with the faint condescension I'd grown to expect. Light reading for a Saturday. She was an interesting woman, very strategic in how she approached legal change. I handed Jerry a cold beer, noting how he relaxed at this seemingly innocent domestic gesture. Incremental victories that built into something larger. Jerry was already scrolling through his phone, attention elsewhere. Over the following weeks, I began what I thought of as my education phase. I reconnected with my law school study group through social media, carefully asking questions about current family law trends, under the guise of intellectual curiosity. I browsed legal databases at the library, always during Jerry's office hours, always careful to clear my browser history. Most importantly, I started reaching out to Carly Rogan. Carly had been 2 years behind me at Harvard, brilliant in the quietly devastating way that made opposing counsel underestimate her until it was too late. She'd built a reputation as one of the city's most effective family law attorneys, the kind of lawyer who could find advantages in seemingly hopeless situations. I called her office on a Tuesday afternoon, my hands shaking slightly as I dialed. Emma Roberts. Or should I say Emma Jacobs now? Carly's voice was warm, genuinely pleased. How long has it been? 5 years. At least. Since the Bar Association fundraiser. I took a steadying breath. Carly, I need to ask you something hypothetical. About post-marital agreements. There was a pause. The kind that told me Carly's excellent instincts were picking up on something beneath my casual tone. Hypothetical, how? If someone signed a post-marital agreement that was poorly drafted, with ambiguous language and undefined terms, what would be the best strategy for ensuring it was interpreted favorably? Another pause, longer this time. Emma, are we talking about a friend's situation, or should I be treating this as a potential client consultation? The moment of truth. Once I answered this question, there would be no pretending my research was academic. Client consultation, I said quietly. Then we should meet in person. And Emma, don't sign anything else, don't agree to any modifications, and don't let anyone know you're seeking legal advice. Can you manage that? Yes. Good. How's Thursday at 2? I'll block out extra time. That night, Jerry came home bubbling with excitement about a new case, a complex corporate merger that would likely make him one of Morrison's highest earners. He talked through dinner about strategy, about the personalities involved, about how this case could position him for managing partner when Byron eventually retired. I listened, asked appropriate questions, refilled his wine glass when it emptied. I played the role of supportive wife with Academy Award precision while mentally cataloging every detail he shared about the firm's financial structure and his own earning potential. Jerry had no idea that his devoted, predictable wife was transforming into the most dangerous opponent he'd ever face. And unlike his courtroom adversaries, I had unlimited access to his strategies, his weaknesses, and his secrets. The student was about to become the master, and the lesson was going to cost Jerry Jacobs everything he thought he'd protected. Thursday at 2 o'clock found me sitting in Carly Rogan's downtown office, a space that radiated quiet competence with its floor-to-ceiling law books and tasteful abstract art. Carly herself looked exactly as I remembered, sharp-eyed, impeccably dressed, with the kind of controlled energy that suggested she could dismantle an opponent's argument while appearing completely serene. "Show me what we're working with," she said after her assistant brought coffee and closed the door behind her. I handed over the photographs of Jerry's handwritten agreement, watching Carly's eyebrows rise as she examined each page. He wrote this himself? After several drinks, he thought he was protecting his assets. Carly's smile was razor thin. Oh, Emma, he did exactly the opposite. She set down the papers and leaned back in her leather chair. This document is a gift. But before we discuss strategy, I need to understand the full situation. Start from the beginning. For the next hour I laid out the progression of my marriage's deterioration, Jerry's systematic undermining, the public humiliations, the financial control he'd begun exerting. Carly took careful notes, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed she understood the psychological dynamics at play. "He's isolating you professionally and socially while making you financially dependent," she said when I finished. Classic power and control pattern. The question is, what outcome do you want? I want him to understand that I'm not powerless, that dismissing me was the biggest mistake of his career. Good. Now about this agreement, technically it's not legally binding as written. No witnesses, no notarization, questionable consideration. But, Carly's smile turned predatory, it does demonstrate his intent to leave you with minimal assets, which, combined with his behavioral pattern, could be very useful in establishing a narrative. She pulled out a fresh legal pad and began sketching out strategy options. "Here's what we're going to do. First, you're going to start documenting everything. I mean everything. Conversations, financial transactions, social interactions, where he diminishes you. Create a timeline. Second, we need to understand his complete financial picture. Partnership agreements, investment accounts, real estate holdings. Third, we're going to let him think he's winning while we build an unassailable case." I left Carly's office with a detailed action plan and a small digital recorder she'd given me. "One-party consent state," she'd explained. "Perfectly legal to record conversations you're part of." The documentation phase became my secret second job. I started with Jerry's home office, photographing documents when he was at work or playing golf, partnership agreements, tax returns, investment statements. I cataloged everything methodically, uploading images to encrypted cloud storage that only Carly and I could access. Jerry's carelessness with confidential documents, something that had once worried me, now became my greatest advantage. He left case files on the kitchen counter, forgot to log out of his laptop, took personal calls on speaker while I was in the next room. He was so confident in my domesticity that he'd stopped seeing me as someone capable of strategic thinking. The recordings were even more illuminating. Jerry had developed a habit of calling Byron from his home office most evenings, and their conversations revealed not just his contempt for me, but his specific plans for our future. Emma's completely checked out intellectually, I heard him tell Byron one Tuesday night. She's basically become a housekeeper who happens to have a law degree she'll never use again. Lucky for you, Byron's voice crackled through the speaker. Smart women are dangerous in divorce proceedings. Jerry's laugh was cold. Not when they've been out of practice for over a decade. Emma couldn't find her way around a courtroom if her life depended on it. I sat in the hallway, recorder running, taking careful notes while my husband and his best friend discussed my professional inadequacies, like they were reviewing a quarterly report. The financial revelations were staggering. Jerry had been hiding assets systematically, offshore accounts, shell companies, investments made in his name alone, despite being acquired with marital funds. The partnership agreement I photographed revealed his annual compensation was nearly double what he'd told me, and he'd been eligible for substantial bonuses he'd never mentioned. Most damaging was a series of emails between Jerry and Byron discussing something called wife insurance, their term for the various ways they protected their assets from potential divorce settlements. They'd even joked about my willingness to sign Jerry's drunken postnup, calling it the easiest money I never saved. But the piece of evidence that made Carly's eyes light up like Christmas morning was a recorded conversation where Jerry explained his long-term strategy to a colleague. The key is making them financially dependent and professionally irrelevant. Jerry's voice was matter-of-fact clinical. Emma hasn't worked in years, has no current professional network, no updated skills. If she ever tried to leave, she'd be starting from zero while I'd be protecting assets she couldn't even find, let alone claim. Brilliant, his colleague had responded. You've essentially made yourself divorce-proof. When I played that recording for Carly, she leaned back in her chair with a smile that would have terrified opposing counsel. Emma, she said softly, your husband just confessed to financial abuse and marital manipulation on tape. He's not just going to lose, he's going to be destroyed. The trap was set, now all we had to do was wait for Jerry to walk into it. With my evidence collection in full swing, I transformed into the most convincing actress of my life. Every morning I woke up and stepped into the role of the perfect, diminished wife, the woman Jerry believed he'd successfully molded through months of systematic undermining. The performance required extraordinary precision. I had to appear just broken enough to satisfy Jerry's ego while remaining functional enough not to raise suspicions. Too defeated, and he might worry about his reputation. Too defiant, and he might become suspicious of my newfound compliance. I perfected the art of strategic submission. When Jerry made his cutting remarks at dinner parties, I developed a repertoire of responses that reinforced his narrative while secretly documenting his behavior. A slight flinch followed by a resigned smile. A nervous laugh that suggested I knew my place. The occasional tear that I'd quickly wipe away, as if embarrassed by my own sensitivity. Emma's been going through a difficult phase, Jerry would explain to concerned friends, his voice dripping with fake compassion. Middle-age identity crisis, you know how it is. All those years focused on domestic life, and now she's questioning her choices. I'd nod along, playing the part of the confused Hausfrau having an existential breakdown, while mentally cataloging every patronizing word for Carly's files. At home, I became even more attentive to Jerry's needs. I cooked his favorite meals, kept the house immaculate, never questioned his increasingly late nights or mysterious weekend work commitments. When he brought work colleagues home for dinner, I played the gracious hostess who knew when to speak and when to fade into the background. Your wife is delightful, I overheard Judge Morrison tell Jerry after one such dinner. So supportive, so undemanding. She's learned to appreciate what she has. Jerry replied with satisfaction. Took some adjustment, but she understands her role now. The casual cruelty of that statement, the implication that I'd been trained like a pet, would have devastated the old Emma. But the new Emma, the one secretly building her husband's professional destruction, simply smiled and cleared the dessert plates, while the digital recorder in my pocket captured every word. Jerry's confidence grew exponentially as my apparent defeat deepened. He began speaking more freely in front of me, treating me like furniture that happened to have ears. Phone calls with Byron became increasingly detailed, their conversations revealing not just their contempt for wives in general, but their specific strategies for maintaining control. The trick is consistent messaging. Jerry explained during one call I recorded from the kitchen. Every interaction reinforces the power dynamic. She suggests something, you redirect. She expresses an opinion, you correct it. She shows independence, you demonstrate how much she needs you. Psychological conditioning. Byron's voice agreed through the speaker. My Judy went through the same process, now she wouldn't dream of questioning my decisions. I served Jerry his evening scotch while they discussed the systematic emotional manipulation of their wives like a business strategy, my hands steady despite the rage building in my chest. The financial control Jerry exercised became even more obvious once I knew what to look for. He'd gradually taken over all household accounts, moved investments into his name alone, and created a complex web of assets I supposedly didn't need to worry about. When I occasionally asked about our finances, he'd pat my hand condescendingly. Emma, sweetheart, you don't have a head for numbers. That's what I'm here for. Meanwhile, I was secretly documenting every transaction, every hidden account, every deliberate effort to exclude me from our marital wealth. Carly had connected me with a forensic accountant who was building a comprehensive picture of Jerry's financial manipulations, all funded through my carefully hoarded household allowance. The most challenging part of the performance was maintaining it around Henrietta. My sister's journalistic instincts had sharpened her awareness of Jerry's behavior, and she'd begun asking increasingly pointed questions about my happiness. You seem different lately, she said, during one of our coffee dates in December. Quieter, more careful. I'm just trying to be a better wife, I replied, hating how easily the lie came. Jerry works so hard and I want to support him better. Henrietta's expression was skeptical. Emma, you've always been supportive. What you're describing sounds like you're erasing yourself. I wanted desperately to tell her the truth, to explain that my apparent erasure was actually a careful strategic withdrawal, but revealing my plans to anyone beyond Carly would jeopardize everything. So I forced tears into my eyes and whispered, maybe that's what marriage requires sometimes. That night, Henrietta called Jerry directly, a conversation I recorded with growing satisfaction. I'm worried about Emma, she told him. She seems to have lost her spark. Henrietta, I appreciate your concern. Jerry's voice was perfectly calibrated for caring brother-in-law, but Emma is going through a natural adjustment. She's discovering what really fulfills her, supporting her husband, focusing on home and family. It's actually quite beautiful to watch. The patronizing tone, the implication that my sister couldn't understand real marriage, the casual dismissal of my autonomy as personal growth, it was all captured in crystal clear audio. By Christmas Eve, I had 18 months of documented abuse, financial manipulation, and Jerry's own recorded admissions of his systematic control tactics. I'd become exactly what he wanted, the perfect, powerless wife. What Jerry didn't realize was that perfection, in the right hands, could be the most devastating weapon of all. The smoking gun arrived 3 days before Christmas, wrapped in Jerry's own arrogance, and delivered through his inability to password protect his hubris. I was in Jerry's home office, ostensibly dusting the mahogany bookshelves, while he was at his final client meeting before the holiday break. The room smelled like leather and expensive cologne, every surface carefully arranged to project success and authority. His laptop sat open on the desk, screen glowing with what appeared to be an email thread. I'd learned to move through Jerry's space like a ghost, cleaning around his work without appearing to pay attention to anything important. But this email thread, the subject line visible even from across the room, made my blood freeze. Operation Christmas Surprise. I glanced toward the hallway, listening for the sound of Jerry's car in the driveway, then moved closer to the screen. What I found there was beyond my worst expectations. The email chain stretched back 2 weeks, a detailed conversation between Jerry and Byron about what they dubbed their Christmas gift to themselves. The plan was laid out with the precision of a military operation, complete with timeline, witnesses, and anticipated outcomes. "Emma's been perfectly compliant lately," Jerry had written. "The conditioning has taken better than expected. She'll be completely unprepared for Christmas dinner." Byron's response was equally chilling. "Judy and I will be there to witness the breakdown. Having multiple people see her emotional collapse will be crucial for the narrative later. Unstable wife, patient husband, inevitable divorce." But it was Jerry's follow-up email that revealed the true scope of their conspiracy. "I've already filed the preliminary paperwork. Divorce petition dated December 23rd, ready to be served December 25th at dinner. The beauty is that she'll be so shocked, so emotional in front of family, that everyone will remember her as the unstable one who couldn't handle a civilized conversation about our marriage's end." My hands were shaking as I scrolled through more of the exchange. They'd choreographed the entire evening, who would sit where, how Jerry would present the papers, even Byron's role as the concerned friend, who would comfort me afterward, while subtly confirming Jerry's version of events. "The bet we made adds perfect psychological pressure," Byron had written. "Telling her I bet you that she'd cry makes her feel like her emotional response is being judged by multiple people. Classic manipulation. She'll either break down and prove our point, or try to be strong and look cold and calculating to everyone watching." Jerry's response made my stomach turn. "Either way we win. Emotional breakdown proves she's unstable. Cold response proves she never really loved me. Beautiful chess move." But the most damaging evidence was Jerry's detailed financial strategy, laid out in an attachment labeled Post-Divorce Asset Protection. He'd been moving money for months, creating shell companies, transferring assets to accounts I'd never heard of. The document outlined how he planned to claim poverty during divorce proceedings, while maintaining hidden wealth offshore. "The postnup she signed gives us additional protection," Jerry had explained to Byron. "Even if her lawyer finds some of the hidden assets, the agreement limits her claims." She was so eager to please when she signed it, never even read the fine print. I photographed every email, every attachment, every piece of their conspiracy with my phone, my hands growing steadier as the magnitude of Jerry's miscalculation became clear. He'd documented his own financial fraud, admitted to psychological manipulation, and outlined a conspiracy to publicly humiliate me, all in writing, all with timestamps, all sent through his law firm's servers. The final email in the chain, sent just that morning, was Jerry's confirmation of the Christmas dinner timeline. "Service at 7 p.m. sharp, right after the main course. I'll present it as a Christmas gift, complete with the wrapped box suggestion you made." The irony is perfect. She's been so focused on making this the ology dinner, and instead it'll be the last meal of her marriage. Byron's response was a single laughing emoji followed by "can't wait to see her face. Wish we could record it." I heard Jerry's car in the driveway and quickly backed away from the computer, returning to my dusting with practiced casualness. When he walked into the office 5 minutes later, I was humming Christmas carols and polishing his law school diploma. "How was your day, sweetheart?" he asked, loosening his tie with the satisfied air of someone who'd just completed an important task. "Wonderful," I replied, continuing to dust around his desk. "I'm so excited for Christmas dinner. Everything's going to be perfect." Jerry's smile was genuinely warm for perhaps the first time in months. "It certainly is.
This Christmas is going to be unforgettable." If only he knew how right he was.
That evening, while Jerry relaxed in front of the fireplace with his evening scotch, I sat in my car in the parking garage of Carly's office building, forwarding copies of Jerry's conspiracy to her secure email account. My phone buzzed with her response within minutes. "Emma, this is it. He's given us everything we need. Christmas dinner is going to be very interesting indeed."
Jerry thought he was playing chess while I played checkers.
What he didn't realize was that I'd been playing poker the entire time, and I was about to reveal a royal flush he never saw coming. Christmas morning dawned crisp and bright, with the kind of pristine snow that made our neighborhood look like a postcard. Jerry woke in an exceptionally good mood, humming in the shower and complimenting my choice of dress, a deep burgundy silk that he said brought out my eyes. He had no idea I'd chosen it specifically because it would look elegant and composed in photographs, which there would definitely be. While Jerry made coffee and scrolled through his phone with barely contained excitement, I made final preparations for what would become the most important performance of my life. Every detail had been orchestrated with Carly's help over the past 72 hours, every contingency planned, every surprise accounted for. At 10 a.m., I called Henrietta under the pretense of confirming dinner arrangements. "Everything's on schedule for 7 o'clock, I told her, my voice bright with holiday cheer. "Jerry's so excited. He says he has a special surprise planned." "What kind of surprise?" Henrietta's journalistic instincts were immediately alert. "He won't tell me, but he's been grinning like a schoolboy all week. You know how Jerry loves grand gestures." I paused just long enough for effect. "Oh, and Henry, would you mind bringing your good camera tonight? I have a feeling we'll want to document this Christmas dinner." I could hear the confusion in my sister's voice, but she agreed. Henrietta's camera would capture everything in high resolution, evidence that would be admissible in court and devastating in the media, should Jerry's reputation require adjustment. At noon, Byron and Judy Jacobs arrived for what they believed would be pre-dinner drinks and front-row seats to my emotional destruction. Byron was practically vibrating with anticipation, his usual corporate composure replaced by the excited energy of someone about to witness a car crash. Judy seemed nervous, glancing between her husband and me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Emma, you look radiant," Byron said, kissing my cheek with theatrical warmth. "Jerry's a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," I replied, the words honey-sweet and completely sincere in a way he'd never understand. "Jerry's given me so much." Jerry poured drinks with the ceremonial air of someone marking a significant occasion. He'd chosen his best scotch for the men, champagne for the ladies, and kept checking his watch like he was timing the countdown to New Year's. To family, he toasted, raising his glass with genuine affection, and to perfect Christmas dinners with perfect endings. Byron nearly choked on his scotch, trying not to laugh. Judy looked increasingly uncomfortable, her eyes darting between the three of us, like she was watching a play she didn't understand. At 3 o'clock, Ryan and Henrietta Roberts arrived with their teenage son Marcus, who immediately disappeared into the living room with his phone. Henrietta carried her professional camera equipment as requested, though she kept shooting me questioning looks that I answered with serene smiles. "Emma's been cooking for 2 days, Jerry announced to the group. "Prime rib, roasted vegetables, that famous apple stuffing her grandmother used to make. She's outdone herself." "I wanted everything to be perfect," I said, accepting compliments on the table settings and centerpiece arrangements. "This feels like such an important Christmas." Jerry's smile was brilliant, anticipatory. "It certainly is." By 5 o'clock, Jerry's parents had arrived, Robert and Donna Jacobs, elegant and reserved as always, bringing their traditional contribution of expensive wine and polite conversation about their recent cruise to the Mediterranean. Jerry's father was a retired judge, his mother a former prosecutor, both sharp enough to recognize legal maneuvering when they saw it, though they had no idea they were about to witness their son's professional suicide in real time. As guests mingled in the living room, I made final preparations in the kitchen. The prime rib was resting, vegetables were warming, and the apple stuffing filled the house with the scent of cinnamon and sage. Everything was progressing exactly as Jerry expected: the perfect family dinner, the unsuspecting wife, the carefully positioned witnesses. What Jerry didn't know was that I'd made some arrangements of my own. At 6:30, the doorbell rang. Jerry looked confused. All our expected guests were already here. I glanced out the window and smiled.
Whoa.
"That must be my surprise," I said brightly. "I invited someone special to join us for dinner." Jerry's expression shifted to mild concern. He hadn't authorized any additional guests, and control was important to him. "Who did you invite, Emma?" I opened the door to reveal Carly Rogan, looking stunning in a forest green cocktail dress and carrying a beautifully wrapped bottle of wine. Behind her stood a man I introduced as Thomas Mitchell, Carly's colleague and one of the city's most respected family court judges. "Jerry, you remember Carly from our law school days?" I said, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "And Judge Mitchell, I thought you'd enjoy meeting him, given your interest in family law procedures." The color drained from Jerry's face as he realized that his carefully orchestrated evening now included two family law experts who would witness every moment of his planned humiliation. Byron looked like he'd swallowed his tongue. "The more the merrier," I said cheerfully, leading our guests into the dining room. After all, the best Christmas surprises are the ones nobody sees coming. The dining room hummed with conversation as I served the prime rib, each slice perfectly pink and tender, accompanied by roasted Brussels sprouts and my grandmother's famous apple stuffing. The crystal chandelier cast warm light over the mahogany table, and the good china gleamed against the burgundy tablecloth I'd selected specifically for this evening. Jerry sat at the head of the table, his confidence slowly returning as dinner progressed smoothly, despite my unexpected guests. He'd recovered from his initial shock at seeing Carly and Judge Mitchell, adapting with the political skill that made him successful in corporate law. Byron had followed Jerry's lead, transforming his earlier panic into jovial host behavior, though I noticed him drinking more wine than usual. "This stuffing is incredible, Emma," Judge Mitchell said, savoring another bite. "Family recipe? My grandmother's secret," I replied, refilling his wine glass. "She always said the key was patience. You can't rush the perfect blend of flavors." "Patience is certainly a virtue," Carly added, her eyes meeting mine with subtle meaning. "Amazing what you can accomplish when you take the time to plan properly." Jerry's laugh was forced, but only I could detect the tension beneath it. Emma's always been very thorough in her preparations. As the main course wound down and I began clearing plates, Jerry's nervous energy became increasingly obvious. He kept checking his watch, glancing at Byron for reassurance, drumming his fingers against the table. This was the moment he'd been anticipating for weeks, his grand finale, his perfectly choreographed destruction of his inconvenient wife. Before dessert, Jerry announced, standing with the theatrical flair of someone delivering an important speech, "I have something special for my beautiful wife." The table fell silent, all eyes turning toward Jerry as he reached into his suit jacket. Byron leaned forward with barely concealed excitement, while Judy looked increasingly uncomfortable. Henrietta's camera clicked softly from across the table. She'd been documenting the entire evening at my request, though she still didn't understand why. "Emma, my dear," Jerry continued, his voice warm with false affection, "we've been married for 12 wonderful years. You've been such a devoted wife, so supportive, so accommodating." The word accommodating hung in the air like a challenge. I met Jerry's eyes steadily, my expression serene and attentive, giving him no hint of what was coming. "Marriage is about growth," Jerry continued, warming to his performance, "about recognizing when circumstances change, when people evolve in different directions. Sometimes the most loving thing spouses can do is acknowledge when they've grown apart." Judge Mitchell's eyebrows rose slightly. As a family court judge, he'd heard this kind of preamble countless times, always preceding some form of relationship dissolution. Carly maintained her perfect composure, but I caught the flash of anticipation in her eyes. Jerry pulled out the manila envelope with ceremonial gravity, placing it on the table in front of me like an offering. "Merry Christmas, darling. I thought it was time we made some adjustments to our arrangement." The room grew tense as everyone processed the implications of Jerry's words. Byron was practically vibrating with excitement, his earlier nervousness replaced by the thrill of watching his friend execute their carefully planned strategy. I looked at the envelope, then back at Jerry's expectant face. He was waiting for the breakdown, the tears, the emotional collapse that would justify everything he'd planned. The bet with Byron hung in the air between us. Would I cry as predicted, or would I surprise them both? "How thoughtful," I said softly, my voice carrying no emotion beyond mild curiosity. "Should I open it now?" "Please do." Jerry's smile was radiant with anticipated triumph. "I think you'll find it illuminating." I opened the envelope with the same care I might use for any piece of correspondence, pulling out the legal documents with steady hands. The petition for dissolution of marriage was professionally prepared, already notarized, complete with Jerry's confident signature across the bottom. "Divorce papers," I said simply, setting them down on the table next to my water glass. "How interesting." Jerry's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the reaction he'd choreographed. Around the table, the silence grew thick with discomfort. Henrietta's face had gone pale, her camera forgotten in her lap. Ryan looked stunned, while Jerry's parents sat frozen in their chairs. "That's it?" Jerry asked, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "You're not going to react." "React how?" I tilted my head with genuine curiosity. "You've clearly put a lot of thought into this decision. The paperwork looks very thorough." Byron shifted uncomfortably in his chair. This wasn't going according to script. Jerry was supposed to be basking in his victory by now, not standing there looking confused by my calm response. I reached beneath my chair and retrieved the crimson gift box I'd placed there earlier, setting it on the table with the same ceremonial weight Jerry had used for his envelope. "Actually," I said, my voice warm with Christmas cheer, "I have something for you too, darling. I think you'll find it even more illuminating than your gift to me." The confidence drained from Jerry's face as he stared at the elegantly wrapped box, finally beginning to realize that perhaps, just perhaps, he wasn't the only one who'd been planning surprises for Christmas dinner. Jerry stared at the crimson gift box, like it might contain a live snake. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by the dawning awareness that his perfectly orchestrated evening was spiraling beyond his control. Byron leaned forward, his face a mask of confused concern, while the rest of our dinner guests watched with the fascination of people witnessing something unprecedented. "Go ahead," I encouraged gently, pushing the box closer to Jerry's plate. "Open it." Jerry's hands shook slightly as he lifted the lid, his face illuminated by the warm glow of the chandelier above. Inside, nestled in tissue paper like a precious heirloom, was his handwritten postnuptial agreement, the same yellow legal pad pages he'd drunkenly scrawled months earlier, now professionally bound and notarized. But that wasn't all. Beneath the agreement lay a flash drive labeled Evidence Portfolio and a formal legal document with the letterhead of Rogan and Associates Family Law. Jerry lifted the bound agreement with trembling fingers, his eyes scanning the familiar handwriting that suddenly looked foreign and threatening. "What is this?" "Your postnuptial agreement," I replied pleasantly, as if discussing the weather. "The one you wrote after that lovely evening of bourbon and legal strategy. I had it properly formatted and notarized. I thought you'd appreciate the professional presentation." The color continued to drain from Jerry's face as he flipped through the pages, seeing his own words rendered in official legal format. Byron stretched to peer over Jerry's shoulder, his expression shifting from confusion to horror as he recognized the document. "Emma," Jerry's voice was carefully controlled. "This was just a casual conversation. Not a real legal document." "Oh, but it is real," Carly interjected smoothly, speaking for the first time since dinner began. "Handwritten agreements are perfectly valid when both parties sign voluntarily." And the language Jerry used was quite specific. Judge Mitchell leaned back in his chair, his experienced eyes taking in the scene with professional interest. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the document. Jerry had no choice but to hand it over, watching helplessly as one of the city's most respected family court judges examined his drunken legal work. The silence stretched impossibly long as Judge Mitchell read, his eyebrows rising incrementally with each paragraph. "Fascinating," the judge murmured finally. "Mr. Jacobs, this agreement essentially waives your claim to any assets acquired during the marriage, while making you responsible for all marital debts. It also includes a rather unusual clause about future earnings being subject to spousal support obligations, regardless of marital status. Did you have legal counsel when you drafted this?" Jerry's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Byron looked like he was experiencing a heart attack in slow motion. "He was his own counsel," I said helpfully. "Jerry's always been very confident in his legal abilities." "The flash drive contains additional documentation," Carly added, her voice professionally neutral despite the satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. "Recorded conversations, financial records, email correspondence, a very thorough evidence portfolio." Jerry's hand moved toward the flash drive, but I gently intercepted it. I don't think that's necessary right now. We're having such a lovely family dinner. Henrietta had recovered from her initial shock and was now photographing everything with the methodical precision of a crime scene investigator. Her journalist instincts had kicked in, recognizing this as the story of a lifetime unfolding in real time. Jerry, Byron finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. What did you write in that agreement? I thought I was protecting my assets, Jerry said weakly, still staring at the bound document in Judge Mitchell's hands. I thought Emma would just sign anything I put in front of her. And I did, I confirmed cheerfully. Just like you predicted, I was so accommodating. The word accommodating hung in the air like a dagger, Jerry's own description of my behavior now revealed as the weapon it had become. Around the table, our guests began to understand they were witnessing something far more complex than a simple divorce announcement. This is quite elegant, actually, Judge Mitchell observed, still studying the agreement. The language is sloppy in places, but the intent is clear. Mr. Jacobs has essentially created a reverse prenup that favors his spouse in every conceivable way. Jerry's father, silent until now, cleared his throat with the authority of a retired judge. Jerry, did you have Emma sign this under duress? No, sir, Jerry admitted miserably. I asked her to sign it, she barely even read it. Because I trusted you, I said simply, meeting Jerry's eyes across the table. I trusted that my husband would never ask me to sign something that wasn't in my best interest. The devastating simplicity of that statement hit Jerry like a physical blow. He'd spent months painting me as naive, dependent, intellectually inferior, and now that very narrative was destroying him. His own words, his own arrogance, his own contempt for my intelligence had become the foundation of his downfall. Byron pushed back from the table abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Jerry, we need to talk, privately. Oh, but we're just getting to the best part, I protested gently. I haven't even shown everyone the correspondence yet. Jerry's eyes widened in panic, as he realized that his carefully planned Christmas surprise had become his Christmas nightmare, and we were only halfway through the evening. I reached for the flash drive with the same casual grace I'd used to serve dinner, connecting it to Jerry's own laptop that I'd quietly retrieved from his office during the confusion. The laptop's screen illuminated the dining room as I navigated to a folder labeled Christmas Evidence. I thought everyone might enjoy seeing some behind-the-scenes footage, I said pleasantly, clicking on the first audio file. Jerry's been so modest about his strategic planning. Jerry's voice filled the room through the laptop speakers, crystal clear and devastating. The key is making them financially dependent and professionally irrelevant. Emma hasn't worked in years, has no current professional network, no updated skills. If she ever tried to leave, she'd be starting from zero while I'd be protecting assets she couldn't even find, let alone claim. The silence that followed was deafening. Jerry's parents looked horrified, his father's judicial composure cracking, as he heard his son casually discuss financial abuse like a business strategy. Henrietta's camera clicked rapidly, documenting every facial expression around the table. When was this recorded? Judge Mitchell asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to evaluating evidence. Last month, I replied, scrolling through the files. There are 18 months of similar conversations. Jerry was very thorough in explaining his methods. I clicked on another file, the conversation between Jerry and Byron about wife insurance and protecting assets from potential divorce settlements. Byron's face went ashen as his own voice emerged from the speakers, laughing about my willingness to sign Jerry's easiest money I never saved post-nup. You recorded us? Byron's voice cracked with indignation and panic. One-party consent state, Carly explained smoothly. Perfectly legal for Emma to record conversations she participated in or overheard in her own home. Jerry had gone completely silent, staring at the laptop screen like it was displaying his own death warrant. Which, in many ways it was. I opened another folder, this one labeled Financial Documentation. Spreadsheets appeared on the screen, detailed breakdowns of Jerry's hidden assets, offshore accounts, shell companies, and the systematic movement of marital funds into accounts bearing only his name. This is fascinating, Judge Mitchell observed, leaning forward to study the data. Mr. Jacobs, these appear to show deliberate concealment of marital assets. Is this accurate? Jerry's mouth moved soundlessly. Across the table, his mother had covered her face with her hands, unable to watch her son's public destruction. The forensic accountant was very thorough, I explained, scrolling through bank statements and investment records. Jerry had quite an impressive system. Shell companies in Delaware, accounts in the Cayman Islands, even some creative real estate trusts. Very sophisticated for someone who claimed we couldn't afford a vacation this year. Henrietta spoke for the first time since the recordings began. Jerry, you told Emma you couldn't afford to travel. Budget was tight, Jerry mumbled, his usual confidence completely evaporated. According to these records, Carly interjected, pulling out a printed summary, Jerry's annual income is approximately $400,000, significantly higher than the $150,000 he's been claiming for household budgeting purposes. The numbers hung in the air like accusations. Ryan, always the financial advisor, whistled low under his breath. That's $250,000 a year you've been hiding from your wife. But the most devastating evidence was still to come. I opened the final folder, Operation Christmas Surprise, and Jerry's conspiracy emails filled the screen. His own words, his own timeline, his own gleeful anticipation of my public humiliation, all displayed in stark black and white. Emma's been perfectly compliant lately, I read aloud from Jerry's email to Byron. The conditioning has taken better than expected. She'll be completely unprepared for Christmas dinner. Jerry's father stood abruptly, his chair falling backward with a crash. That's enough, he said, his voice shaking with rage. Jerry, what have you become? Dad, I can explain. Explain what? The elder Jacobs's judicial demeanor had completely shattered. Explain how you systematically abused your wife. Explain how you conspired to humiliate her in front of family. Explain how you hid assets and manipulated finances. I scrolled to Byron's response about having multiple people see her emotional collapse, being crucial for the narrative later. Judy Jacobs made a small wounded sound, finally understanding her husband's role in the conspiracy. The bet, I said softly, looking directly at Byron. Tell everyone about the bet. Byron's face was gray, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool evening air.
It wasn't.
We didn't mean. Byron bet Jerry that I'd cry when the divorce papers were served. I explained to the horrified faces around the table. They thought my emotional response would be entertainment. Jerry was so confident in his psychological manipulation that he wagered on my tears. Judge Mitchell set down his wineglass with deliberate care. Mr. Jacobs, in 30 years on the family court bench, I've rarely seen such a comprehensive case of financial and emotional abuse documented with such precision. Jerry finally found his voice, though it came out as a desperate whisper. Emma, we can work this out privately. We don't need to air our personal business. Oh, but this isn't personal anymore, I interrupted gently. This became public the moment you decided to serve me divorce papers at Christmas dinner in front of our family and friends. I closed the laptop and smiled at my husband with genuine warmth. You wanted a performance, Jerry. You wanted witnesses. You wanted drama. I gestured around the table at the shocked faces, the running camera, the family court judge who'd just heard detailed evidence of financial fraud. Congratulations, darling. You got exactly what you asked for. The room sat in stunned silence, the weight of Jerry's exposed conspiracy settling over our Christmas dinner like a shroud. But I wasn't finished. 18 months of careful preparation had yielded more than just recordings and financial documents. I had been thorough in ways that would have impressed Jerry himself, if he weren't currently experiencing his own destruction. There's one more thing, I said, reaching into my purse with deliberate calm. Something I discovered just this morning. I placed a thick manila folder on the table next to the laptop, the contents organized with the precision of a legal brief. Jerry's eyes fixed on it with the horrified fascination of someone watching an approaching train wreck. Jerry, do you remember Rebecca Morrison? I asked conversationally, opening the folder to reveal a series of photographs and bank statements. The paralegal who left Morrison and Associates so suddenly last spring. Jerry's face went from gray to green. Byron made a choking sound that might have been an attempt at words. She didn't leave voluntarily, I continued. my voice maintaining that same pleasant dinner party tone. She was paid to disappear, quite generously, actually, $50,000 from an account Jerry thought I'd never find. The photographs showed Jerry and a young blonde woman entering and leaving various hotels, restaurants, and what appeared to be a downtown apartment. The timestamps spanned nearly 8 months, ending abruptly in March. Emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and infidelity, Judge Mitchell observed with clinical detachment. The trifecta of marital misconduct. Jerry's mother stood abruptly from the table, her face pale with shame and fury. "I can't listen to any more of this," she whispered, but her voice carried clearly in the silent room. Donna Jacobs, who'd spent 40 years building a reputation as a pillar of the legal community, was watching her son's professional and personal reputation incinerate before her eyes. "Mom, please," Jerry started, but she cut him off with a look that could have frozen fire. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice shaking. "Don't you dare try to explain this away." I pulled out another set of documents from the folder, credit card statements showing charges for jewelry, dinners, and hotel rooms that Jerry had never mentioned to me. "The interesting thing about the Rebecca situation," I continued, "is that Jerry used our joint credit card for many of these expenses. Technically, I helped pay for his affair." Henrietta's camera continued clicking, documenting every revelation, every shocked expression, every moment of Jerry's public dismantling. As a journalist, she understood she was witnessing something unprecedented, a master class in long-term strategic revenge. "But Rebecca wasn't the first," I said, pulling out another section of the folder. "There was also Sarah Chen from the district attorney's office, and before her, Angela Rivera from the public defender's office. Jerry has quite a pattern of mentoring young legal professionals." The evidence was overwhelming: photos, receipts, hotel bills, even airline tickets for weekend trips I'd been told were mandatory bar association conferences. Jerry had been living a double life for years, funded by marital assets, while systematically undermining my confidence and independence. Each relationship followed the same pattern, I explained to the horrified faces around the table. Young, ambitious women looking for career advancement. Jerry would promise mentorship, advancement, connections. When they became inconvenient, he'd arrange for their quiet departure, usually with a severance package that came from our joint accounts. Byron was hyperventilating now, clearly realizing that his own law firm had been facilitating Jerry's serial infidelity. "Emma, I had no idea." "Oh, but you did," I interrupted, pulling out email printouts that showed Byron's involvement in arranging the various women's departures. "You helped coordinate Rebecca's exit interview. You approved the severance payments. You even suggested the language for the non-disclosure agreements." Carly leaned forward with professional interest. "Non-disclosure agreements to cover up workplace sexual misconduct. That's quite serious, Byron." The implications hit Byron like a physical blow. His law firm, his reputation, his partnership, everything was now tainted by association with Jerry's systematic abuse of power and position. "The most interesting part," I continued, savoring this moment of complete revelation, "is that Jerry documented everything himself. The same arrogance that led him to record his strategy sessions about manipulating me also led him to keep detailed records of his affairs. Email confirmations for hotel reservations, calendar entries for his various meetings, even photos on his personal cloud storage." I showed them printouts of Jerry's own calendar, meeting with RM, scheduled for the same times and dates as the hotel receipts, conference call with AR, corresponding to restaurant charges in parts of the city Jerry had no business visiting. "You kept records of your own infidelity?" Ryan asked, his financial advisor's mind boggled by such spectacularly poor judgment. Jerry sat frozen, watching his entire life collapse in real time. His carefully constructed image as a successful, ethical attorney was being systematically destroyed by his own documentation, his own arrogance, his own absolute certainty that I was too naive and dependent to ever challenge him. "The question now," Judge Mitchell said gravely, "is what legal and professional consequences will follow from tonight's revelations." I smiled at Jerry across the table, my expression warm and genuinely grateful. "Thank you, darling. This has been the most enlightening Christmas dinner of my life. Jerry opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. There were no words for the magnitude of what he'd lost: his marriage, his reputation, his career, and quite possibly his freedom. The game was over, and Jerry Jacobs had lost everything. The exodus began with Jerry's parents. Robert Jacobs, the retired judge who'd spent decades upholding the law, couldn't bear to remain in the same room as his son's documented criminality. He stood with the dignity of someone accustomed to courtroom gravity, but his voice shook with disappointment and rage. "Jerry, your mother and I raised you better than this," he said, his words carrying the weight of a judicial sentence. "What you've done, to Emma, to your profession, to our family name is unforgivable." Donna Jacobs followed her husband toward the door, pausing only to approach me with tears in her eyes. "Emma, I'm so sorry. If I'd known what he was doing to you." She couldn't finish the sentence, her voice breaking under the weight of maternal shame. "You couldn't have known," I replied gently, taking her hands in mine. Jerry was very skilled at presenting the image he wanted people to see. Byron and Judy Jacobs departed next, though not before Byron turned back with the desperation of someone watching his career evaporate. "Emma, surely we can discuss this privately." The firm's reputation, Judge Mitchell interrupted coldly, should have been protected by not enabling systematic workplace harassment and financial fraud. Judy paused at the door, looking back at me with something between admiration and terror. "How long did you plan this?" 18 months, I replied honestly. From the moment I realized Jerry wasn't just disrespecting me, he was actively working to destroy me. After they left, the remaining dinner guests sat in contemplative silence. Henrietta had finally lowered her camera, though I knew she'd captured enough evidence to fill a dozen news stories. Ryan kept shaking his head in disbelief, his financial advisor's mind still processing the scope of Jerry's hidden assets. Jerry himself had retreated into a kind of catatonic shock, staring at the remnants of his Christmas surprise, divorce papers that now seemed laughably irrelevant compared to the criminal charges he'd be facing. "What happens now?" Henrietta asked, her journalist instincts engaging with the practical implications of the evening's revelations. Carly answered with professional precision. "Tomorrow morning I'll be filing for emergency asset protection, requesting temporary spousal support based on Jerry's actual income, and submitting copies of tonight's evidence to the State Bar Association. The criminal referrals for financial fraud and workplace harassment will follow by afternoon." Judge Mitchell nodded approvingly. "This level of documented abuse will expedite every legal proceeding. I've rarely seen such a comprehensive case file." Jerry finally found his voice, though it emerged as a broken whisper. "Emma, please, we can work this out. You don't have to destroy my entire life." I looked at my husband, this man who'd spent years systematically erasing my autonomy, my confidence, my very sense of self, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine pity. "Jerry," I said softly, "I didn't destroy your life. I simply documented it." The truth of that statement hit him like a physical blow. Every piece of evidence I'd presented had come from his own actions, his own words, his own arrogant assumption that I was too naive to recognize what he was doing to me. "The irony," Carly observed, "is that if Jerry had simply filed for divorce honestly, he might have kept some of his assets and reputation. The cover-up and conspiracy made everything exponentially worse. Pride," Judge Mitchell added gravely, "has been the downfall of many attorneys. The belief that you're smarter than everyone else, that you can manipulate the system without consequences." Over the next hour, as the remaining guests gradually departed, the full scope of Jerry's immediate future became clear. Morrison and Associates would have to conduct a complete internal investigation. The State Bar would launch disciplinary proceedings that could result in disbarment. The IRS would inevitably become interested in his hidden offshore accounts. Most devastating of all, the story would break in the morning papers. Henrietta's photographs and my recorded evidence would make this the legal scandal of the year. The prominent attorney who'd been so confident in his manipulation tactics that he'd documented his own crimes. "Where will you go?" I asked Jerry as he stood to leave, his earlier confidence replaced by the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd lost everything in a single evening. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely audible. Byron won't take my calls, my parents, my reputation. Everything's gone. You still have the guest house, I said gently. The one you allocated to me in your postnup. I'm feeling generous tonight. You can stay there until you figure out your next steps. The cruel kindness of that offer, letting him live in the space he deemed appropriate for his discarded wife, was the final humiliation of the evening. As Jerry gathered his coat and the remnants of his dignity, he turned back one last time. How did you become so cold? I considered the question seriously, thinking about the woman I'd been 18 months ago, trusting, accommodating, eager to please. Then I thought about the woman I'd become, strategic, self-reliant, absolutely unbreakable. I didn't become cold, Jerry, I replied with perfect honesty. I became careful. There's a difference. As the door closed behind my soon-to-be ex-husband, I stood in my dining room surrounded by the wreckage of his Christmas surprise, feeling lighter than I had in years. The performance was over. The real Emma Roberts could finally take center stage. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the office of Roberts and Associates Family Law, my office, with my name on the door and my law degree finally hanging where it belongs. The space is bright and welcoming, designed to make frightened, desperate women feel safe when they walk through the door carrying secrets they've never told anyone. Because I know what it's like to live in a house where silence becomes survival, where you learn to make yourself smaller until you almost disappear entirely. Jerry? The last I heard, he was working at a small firm in another state, his law license suspended pending the outcome of several ongoing investigations. Byron's firm collapsed within 3 months of our Christmas dinner. It's amazing how quickly prestigious clients disappear when they discover their attorneys have been enabling workplace harassment and financial fraud. But this isn't really about Jerry anymore. This story stopped being about him the moment I realized that his cruelty was never about me. It was about his own insecurity, his need to feel powerful by making someone else feel powerless. I want to talk to you directly now. Yes, you, watching this story unfold from wherever you are, whatever situation you might be in. Maybe you're in a marriage where you've learned to check your husband's mood before speaking. Maybe you're with someone who corrects your opinions in public, who speaks for you like you can't form thoughts of your own. Maybe you've started to believe that this is just what marriage looks like, that love requires you to become smaller, quieter, more accommodating until you're not sure who you are anymore. I want you to know something: that's not love. That's control, and you don't have to accept it. When someone consistently undermines your intelligence, dismisses your opinions, isolates you from friends and family, controls your access to money, or makes you feel like you're going crazy for noticing their cruelty, that's not your fault. That's not something you caused or deserved or can fix by being more understanding. That's abuse, and it's designed to make you feel like you have no options, no power, no way out. But you do have power, more than you realize. Every woman who's ever escaped an abusive situation started exactly where you are now, feeling trapped, feeling helpless, feeling like maybe you're overreacting or being too sensitive. The difference between women who stay and women who leave isn't strength or courage or resources, though those things help. The difference is the moment when you stop asking, "How can I make this better?" and start asking, "Do I deserve better?" You do deserve better. You deserve to speak without measuring your words against someone else's potential reaction. You deserve to have opinions, ambitions, friendships, and financial security. You deserve to be valued for your intelligence, not diminished for it. If you're in a situation where someone is systematically trying to erase your sense of self, start documenting. Keep records. Find one person you trust, a lawyer, a counselor, a friend who knew you before you learned to doubt yourself. Begin rebuilding the network of support that manipulation tactics work so hard to destroy. Most importantly, remember who you were before you learned to be afraid. That woman, strong, capable, deserving of respect, she's still there. She's just been buried under months or years of someone else's insecurity projected onto you. The woman who served divorce papers to Jerry Jacobs at Christmas dinner wasn't someone new. She was the same person who'd graduated from Harvard Law, who'd built a successful career, who'd always been intelligent and strategic and powerful. She'd just forgotten for a while, convinced by someone who needed her to be weak that she actually was. You are not weak, you are not trapped, you are not powerless, and you are definitely not alone. The game isn't over until you decide it's over, and when you're ready to win, You'll be amazed at how much power you've had all along. Trust me on this, I've been exactly where you are. And if I can serve Christmas dinner with a side of justice, so can you. You've got this. I believe in you. Now go show them what you're really made of. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.